My name's T, and I'm looking for the greatest video game of all time. Today we're playing
All praises to Diablo, Lord of Terror and survivor of the Dark Exile.
Stay a while and listen, and while you do, I want you to think about the first game you ever played. Now forget it and think about the first game you really played, the first game that really got under your skin. For me, that was Diablo. Probably. I was quite young at the time, so I may get the order a bit wrong, but Diablo is certainly up there with, I don't know, Monkey Hero? I was a little kid, okay? You might ask T, what is a child that young doing playing a game as harrowing as Diablo? And the same question occurred to me while I was writing this, so I called my dad and asked, and his explanation was, "You were growing up, kids." I don't know why that came out as a Scottish accent, he's not Scottish, but whatever. Anyway, every other Sunday, me, my dad and my sister would take turns playing Diablo. There were 3 of us and 3 characters, and as the youngest, I got to pick first. Being a boy whose age was in the single digits, I obviously picked guy with sword. My sister, being the girl, picked the girl character.
I can't cast that here.
And my dad was left with, naturally, the best character in the entire game. You were growing up with kids. And we set out on our journey to avenge this guy.
Your death will be avenged.
Your death will be avenged.
Your death will be avenged.
Now I know I haven't explained how Diablo works yet, but do I even have to? Even if you've never played Diablo before, you've played Diablo. It's the OG ARPG. It's the original action role-playing game. There are obvious clones like Torchlight or Path of Exile, but if you look at any action RPG closely enough, you start to see Diablo in its DNA. Perhaps the best action RPG of recent years was Supergiant's Hades. And even though they share almost none of the same mechanics, it's impossible to play it and not think to yourself, this is basically Diablo. And if you had to stop and think to yourself, what do you mean they share none of the same mechanics? You've kind of proven my point. Anyway, if after all that you still need an explanation, here's the long version. You click on things, you hit them, and they die. And sometimes you cast spells. And that might sound overly simplistic, but it's not. I actually love it. I was shocked how much fun I had playing this game again, over 2 decades later, but its stripped back simplicity is super refreshing.
Fresh meat.
To the modern player, it might seem stupid that you can just stand in a doorway and tank waves and waves of enemies, but it's really not. You see, at its core, Diablo is a game about doors. In Diablo, doors serve not only an architectural function, but a tactical one, more specifically as valuable choke points in battle. Exactly how you use them will depend on the class you pick. The fighter is easily overwhelmed in an open space, but he has the great fortitude that allows him to block narrow spaces, turning the humble door frame into a demonic meat grinder. The rogue is much more agile, but runs into trouble if rushed in a small space. To her, the doorway is a funnel that separates her enemies, making it easier to pick off the stragglers. It also provides valuable cover against her biggest threat, other ranged enemies. For the sorcerer, the door is a guarantee, a vertex through which all enemies must cross, the perfect place to throw down a firewall spell to cause maximum damage. Doors are also how we the player explore the map. Diablo's maps are procedurally generated, so you're never exactly sure what you'll face next. But behind the door is not just a black space. Diablo employs a little trick by showing you the interiors of some rooms, usually a reward, a bookcase containing a magical tome, or an altar bestowing a great boon. You won't see the enemies, however, until you open the door. Will it be a room of goat people? Maybe skeletons? Some encounters you might never see in your run, like this guy who mistook a lamppost for a powerful, demonic standard.
You give? Yes, good! Go now! We strong! We kill all with big magic!
I have no room.
But the point is, you don't know until you open the door. This means you're tense and excited for every twist of the knob. And when the battle is over, or sometimes when you need to run, a magical doorway is the most practical way back to the safety of Tristram, our base camp. A city that is literally the doorway to hell. Diablo is a game about doors. And speaking of Tristram, it is one of the greatest cities in video games. And yes, I said city. I know the population is like 6 dudes, but 1, it has a cathedral.
I can't
And 2,
cast that here.
according to Wikipedia, this is the de facto capital of the region. So Tristram
What
is
ails you, my
one of
friend?
the greatest cities in video games. And Tristram is the real reason that I wanted to make this video. Listen again to Tristram's theme. You will have one of 2 responses. Number 1, if you've never played Diablo before, you will find it incredibly creepy. Number 2, if you have played Diablo before, you will feel an almost animalistic sense of calm flooding over you. And this is because of how Diablo conditions you. You see, most of Diablo takes place in the claustrophobic caverns and catacombs under the cathedral. It's a violent, tense and unnerving environment where literally everything you can interact with, be that monsters, chests, barrels and, of course, even doors, they can all kill you. There is no peace down below. The only place that is truly safe is Tristram. And so over time, little by little, you learn about Tristram and its citizens. You learn how to relax here, and you learn to call it your home. And this transformation from the sinister to the sanctuary is what makes Tristram, and by extension, Diablo, so memorable. A beautiful harmony of world, gameplay and sound design tricks your brain into flagging this obviously unsettling scene as a safe one. Little by little, Diablo has corrupted you. Alright, it's fun fact time. And let me tell you, there are so many interesting stories from the production, but I'm going to stick to those that give the most insight into Diablo's design and aesthetic. If you're really interested, I'm going to post a link to lead programmer David Brevik's Diablo post-mortem talk from the Game Design Conference in the description. It is an absolute treasure trove of information, so go and check it out after this video. Fun fact number 1. Diablo originally had a time limit. In the original version of the game, the player had an item called the Map of Stars that counted down to a celestial event when the stars and the planets would align. If this happened, the Lord of Darkness Diablo would reach his full power and the final battle would become much, much harder. They removed the feature in the final build of the game because it discouraged players from exploring, but there's still a cinematic in the game's files that shows Diablo himself being empowered by the cosmic event. You can still feel the effect this feature had on the game's design. On my second playthrough of the game, I tried to rush through the game as quickly as possible, just like a player might on a timer. And actually this corrected some of the imbalances in the game and made it a lot more enjoyable. For example, although you still level up at a reasonable pace, the lack of extra equipment encourages you to make more use of the shopkeepers and actually use some of the money that you acquire instead of hoarding it in the town square like some kind of Tolkien-esque dragon. think this idea is so thematic and really exciting. Countdowns in games are always so dramatic, and I would love to play a version of Diablo that still has this feature intact. Fun fact number 2. Diablo was originally meant to be claymation. Kinda. In an early version of the Diablo design document, they decided that they wanted to animate the characters using stop motion. They were inspired by the game Primal Rage, a fighting game for arcade machines that used the technique to great effect a couple of years earlier in 1994. Unfortunately, while studying the techniques, it turned out to be a feasibility nightmare, and so they dumped the idea before development on the game even began. However, I think you can still see the desire for this aesthetic in some of the monster designs. For me, the skeletons are particularly eerie in the way that they move, taking clear inspiration from cinematic skeletons, like those from Sinbad the Sailor. Games like Cuphead mark a resurgence of artistic graphical styles, but it's cool that even with the limited technology available to them over 25 years ago, game designers were still trying to push aesthetic boundaries. Fact number 3. Diablo was a game changer for multiplayer gaming. Back in the 90s, setting up multiplayer wasn't exactly easy, and Blizzard's Battle.net aimed to change that by making multiplayer as simple as clicking a button. Diablo was originally planned as a turn-based single-player experience, but when Condor ran out of money, they were acquired by Blizzard, who wanted to make the game a real-time multiplayer online game. Blizzard won on all counts, and so Battle.net was integrated and released with Diablo. Diablo's multiplayer still works to this day, making it possibly the longest supported online multiplayer game in existence. But that's a topic for another video, so like and subscribe if you want to see it. Finally, we usually end on stupid Metacritic comments. But the truth is, I don't really care what anyone else thinks about Diablo. It is a game that is so deeply moulded the way that I interact with video games as a media, it would be impossible for me to give an objective opinion. But I couldn't help noticing this one, by Gazwinich, who said, "My first experience with Diablo 1 was playing on PlayStation, and it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I bet it would have been different if I'd have played on PC. 3 out of 10. Yes, it would." So please, if you have been inspired by this retrospective to give Diablo a go, don't get the PS1 version. I wouldn't describe it as the worst thing that ever happened to me, but do yourself a favour and grab the PC version. It's like $5 on good old games. And so with that parting advice, we need to answer the question, is Diablo the greatest game of all time? I think you already know my answer. This time at least, I don't give a f***.